Rosemary, I started digging into the Yeshua being unclean, and that is deep. I talked about touching the dead body, and I dug into that a little bit, but something else came up this past week that diverted that study. But I did want to bring this up to you. For the touching of the leper, if you go back and you look at the cleansing, that was until evening. He had to go outside until evening. Well, he spent most of his time. He spent most of his time outside anyway, right? So, but it is an interesting study. You have to put your thinking cap on and dig through it. I will finish that study and talk to you about it. But today, I'm going to do a part 3 that surprised me. A part 3. We did part 1 a couple of weeks ago, part 2 yesterday. Part 2 last week. And we talked about these images of the invisible God. And we talked about Moses having that role because Yah gave it to him and said, you will be as God before Aaron and my people, and you will be as God to Pharaoh and the world. And then we went back and we jumped forward the next week and we looked at Yeshua and how he filled that role. And Paul flat says that he is the image of the invisible God. Okay? And today, we're going to look at Abraham in that role. Abraham. Now, I don't know how many of you have heard my testimony before, but somewhere back in the 90s, mid-90s, maybe the late 80s or the early 90s, the Lord set me up because I was smarter than everybody else. And I ended up, there was a teenage kid that needed a ride across town to go to a Bible study. And I was smart enough to stay there because it would have been wasting gas if I took him out there, came home, and then went back and got him and then brought him back, right? During that Bible study, and at that time, I was not a Bible student. I didn't own a Bible. But this kid had been sharing with me. And I went to that Bible study. During that Bible study, here's what I remember to this day. The pastor, his name was John. He was from a Baptist church in San Juan Capistrano, and he came up to do a home study. He came up all that way. And as he was teaching from Galatians, and he was teaching how Abraham was called out. And again, like I said, I didn't have an interest in God. I knew God existed, but I didn't know how to follow him or any of that. But at that study, it was impressed upon my heart, pay attention to that because that's vitally important. And it's true. And I'm like, okay, I felt that. Nothing happened for the next 6-8 weeks. I left that Bible study and went right back to what I was doing. But over the progression of time, that keeps coming up. It's come up in a few of my studies here. This study today is going to be foundational because it's that important. Well, actually, it's going to be 2 parts because I couldn't get it all in one. I'm going to set up this week for what I'm going to say next week. So, I'll ask a question. I'm not expecting everybody to just believe what I say because I say it. Could he have been another image of the invisible Elohim? So, Paul said in Galatians 3, and the scripture foreseeing that Elohim would justify the Gentiles by faith preached the gospel to Abraham beforehand, saying, in you all the nations shall be blessed. We all remember that. And in Genesis 12, verse 1, at his calling, Yah said to Abraham, get out of your country, from your family, and from your father's house, to a land that I will show you. Now, Abram, the name Abram, it means exalted father. The Strong's, the biblical use is exalted father. The Strong's definition of the Hebrew word, the H48, is the high father. By Abraham getting out of his country, away from his family and his father's house, will this make Abram separated from everyone but Elohim? Thus making Elohim Abram's father? Or does it make Abram a picture of the Father? I'm going to see if I can make a point that it does. So in Genesis 12:2, I will make you this is Yah still speaking, I will make you a great nation, I will bless you and make your name great, and you shall be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and I will curse him who curses you. And in all the families of the earth you shall be blessed. So Abram departed as Yah had spoken, and Lot went with him. And Abram was 75 years old when he had departed from Haran. And then Abram took Sarai, his wife, and Lot, his brother's son, and all their possessions that they had gathered, and the people whom they had acquired in Haran, and they departed to go to the land of Canaan. So they came to the land of Canaan. Now remember, Moses wrote this, and although he wrote it, he wasn't there to witness any of this. It had to be told to him, I believe, on Mount Sinai and them trips that he took up there. This was explained to him, and he wrote it down, and it was for our benefit even today. In Genesis 12:6, Abram passed through the land to the place of Shechem, as far as the terebinth tree of Moreh, and the Canaanites were in the land. And then Yah appeared to Abram and said, to your descendants I will give this land. Remember that, it's going to come up again in a different context in just a bit. To your descendants I will give this land. And there he built an altar to Yah, who had appeared to him. And he moved from there to the mountain east of Bethel, and pitched his tent between Bethel and west of Ai, with Bethel on the west and Ai on the east. And there he built the altar to Yah, and he called on the name of Yah. Now, where he's talking about, I made a map, but I'm not going to do this electronically, so I'm just going to have to paint a picture. Jericho, let's see, I got to do this backwards, huh? Okay, Jericho is here. Okay, a little bit to the east and to the north is Ai, and then you go a little bit more to the west and north is Ai, and then you go a little bit farther west and a little bit more north, and there's Bethel. And he put his tent right in between there. And if you couldn't picture that in your mind, it's okay. You wouldn't have been able to picture it if I drew it either. So, okay, so in verse 8, and he moved from there to the mountain east of Bethel, and he pitched his tent. Okay, verse 9, so Abram journeyed, going on still toward the south. Now Abram goes down into Egypt, and he tells Sarai to say that she's his sister. You know the story. And Pharaoh hears from Yah that Sarah's married, and he has a little talk with Abram and send him on his way. Oh, and Sarai received a servant named Hagar at that point. Now in chapter 13, now what something I want to a point I want to make right now. I'm going to go through at a rapid rate, hitting the high spots, Genesis 12 to Genesis 24. Okay, we're going to get through chapter 15 today, as I make my point, there's quite a bit that's going to be left out. We'll touch on some high points, but there's quite a bit that's going to be left out. In Genesis 13 now, Abram went up from Egypt, he and his wife, and all that they had, and Lot with him to the south. And Abram was rich in livestock and silver and in gold. And he went on his journey from the south as far as Bethel to the place where his tent had been at the beginning, between Bethel and Ai, to the place of the altar which he had made there at first. And there Abram called on the name of Yah. Lot also went with Abram. Lot also, who went with Abram, had flocks and herds and tents. Now, this is the importance of reading. I'm looking around this room, and I know most of the people in this room has read through Genesis 12 and 13 and 14 and 15, probably no less than 10 times. Some of you, more than 25 or 30, okay? But we all know that we can pick up something new each time we read through it. So here we see at this point that Abram, he really hasn't left all that Yah had commanded. And I say that because he's left the land and he's left his father's house, but he had not separated himself from his family yet. Yah had told Abram that he would give this land to your descendants, but he hasn't yet shown Abram the extent of the land that he was going to give him. So now, in 13 verse 6, chapter 13 verse 6, now the land was not able to support them, that they may dwell together, for their possessions were so great that they could not dwell together. And there was strife between the herdsmen of Abram's livestock and the herdsmen of Lot's livestock. The Canaanites and the Perizzites then dwelt in the land. So Abram said to Lot, please let there be no strife between you and me, and between my herdsmen and your herdsmen, for we are brethren. Is not the whole land before you? Please separate from me. If you take the left, I'll go to the right. If you take the right, I'll go to the left. So Lot lifted his eyes, and he saw the plain of the Jordan, that it was well watered everywhere. And this was before Yah had destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. It was like the garden of Yah, like the land of Egypt towards Zoar. Then Lot chose for himself all the plain of the Jordan, and Lot journeyed east, and they separated from each other. Now that's Genesis 13 verse 11, if you're following along. Now look what happens in the very next verse, verse 14. And Yah said to Abram, after Lot had separated from him, lift your eyes now and look from the place where you are, northward, southward, eastward, and westward. For all the land which you see, I give to you and your descendants forever. And I will make your descendants as the dust of the earth, so that if a man could number the dust of the earth, then your descendants also could be numbered. Arise and walk the land through its length and its width, for I give it to you. Notice that in Genesis 12, he said, go to a land I will show you. And he didn't show him the land, pointed out specifically. Now, some might say, well, that's a small point. No, that's an important point. It wasn't until Lot was separated too, so it was the family, the father, and the country that he had separated from, that he was shown the land. All right, so moving on to Genesis 14. We know that Lot goes down into Sodom, and there's a war, there's a battle that goes on, and Lot gets taken away, and his goods. And we're going to pick it up in verse 13, Genesis 14, verse 13. Then one who had escaped came and told Abram the Hebrew, for he dwelt by the terebinth trees of Mamre, the Amorite, the brother of Eshcol, the brother of Aner, and they were allies with Abram. Now, when Abram heard that his brother was taken captive, because right now Lot was his brother's son, Lot's carrying on his brother's tradition, which is not, or his brother's line, which is not Abraham's line. Okay, all right. That he armed his massive army of 318 trained servants who were born in his own house, and he went in pursuit of them as far as Dan. And he divided his forces among them by night, and he and his servants attacked them and pursued them as far as Hobah, which is north of Damascus. So he brought back all the goods, and he also brought back his brother Lot and his goods, as well as the women and the people. And the king of Sodom went out to meet him in the valley of Shaveh, that is the King's Valley, after his return from the defeat of that guy right there, Kedor Lamer, and the kings who were with him. So, I want to point something else out. Back up in Genesis 14, verse 13, we have the first use of the word Hebrew. Now, Strong says about the word Hebrew, if you look at the Strong's definition of the Hebrew word, it's number 5677, an Eberite, a Hebrew, a descendant of Eber, Hebrew. Brown Driver Briggs digs it a little deeper, takes it a little bit deeper. And they say it's an adjective in the name of a people, either to put in the mouth of foreigners, like the Egyptians or the Philistines, or it's used to distinguish Israel from foreigners. It equals one from beyond, one from the other side. It's probably Hebrew in Hebrew tradition, meaning the other side of the Euphrates, or even possibly the other side of the Jordan, given this was done in Canaan. Did I go into that next? I think I went into it. Yes. Okay. Now, I want you to keep that in mind, because I'm going to dig into that just a little bit more, and I'm going to tie it to a couple of things that we've talked about in the past two studies. Now, how many of you are aware that there are 4 levels of understanding or interpretation in Hebrew thought? Okay, right? All right. The Pesat is the simple and the plain meaning. The Remez is the hint, or it's allegorical. It looks for hidden hints or allusions or symbolic meanings beneath the surface. Like, for example, the creation of light before the sun is seen by many as a hint to spiritual light, wisdom, Messiah, or Torah. Now, we talked about it, the Messiah part of that, in the past couple of weeks. The light in Genesis was the same one that Yeshua said, I'm the light of the world, and he said, we're the light of the world. It's the same one that blinded Paul that was on the road to Damascus, and it's the same one that you're going to see when the kingdom of heaven, the new heaven and the new earth, comes down. that doesn't have a sun or a moon when it comes down, because what's the light? The Messiah, Yeshua. Okay, so that's the hidden, that's what it's talking about there. Now the Drash explores comparative meanings, moral lessons, and homiletical teachings and stuff. And the rabbis often use stories and analogies to cross-reference, to draw out moral and ethical lessons. Yeshua used this a lot, didn't he? When he spoke in the parables, he used this a lot, right? And then there's the sod. This is the deepest, often mystical or spiritual meaning found through the Kabbalah or hidden revelation. An example is seeing in the creation story mysteries about Yah's attributes, or interpreting the Song of Songs as a mystical picture of Yah's love for Israel. It asks, what is the hidden mystery of Elohim here? I'm going to go back and look at that verse again. The first word, the first time we use Hebrew, Brown Driver Briggs, used to distinguish Israel from foreigners, one from beyond, one from the other side. Now, I am going to suggest to you that the hidden meaning here is the difference between the natural man and the spiritual man. I'm going to try to build that case over the rest of this study and next week. And I believe I'm going to tie it into John chapter 3. Okay? So, I just suggested that crossing over, it's the natural man and the spiritual man there. How can I draw that conclusion? Well, Yah called Abraham away from his country, he called him away from his family, and he called him away from his fathers, leaving Abraham connected to no one on earth. Some of you might think that's a stretch, but run that through all of Scripture and see if it pans out. In fact, I'll help you get a jump start on your research today as I go through this, and next week even further. But getting back to Genesis 14, there's one more thing I want to point out. So he brought back all the goods, and he also brought back his brother Lot. Now, we've already talked about this. Lot was carrying on his father's name and his father's heritage. Therefore, he was Abram's brother and was part of your family. Okay? Your father, your family, your land. Come out of them. Now, I don't, and Genesis 14 goes on and talks about Melchizedek and all that, but I don't want to go into that today. We're going to go right on by that, and we're going to jump down to Genesis 14, verse 22. But Abram said to the king of Sodom, I have raised my hand to Yahweh Elohim Most High, the possessor of heaven and earth, and I will take nothing from a thread to a sandal strap, and that I will not take anything that is yours, lest you should say, I have made Abram rich, except only what the young men have eaten and the portion of the men who went with me, and let them take their portion. Abram was sworn to Elohim alone. Now picking it up in Genesis 15. You're all familiar with this, so I feel comfortable skimming through this at this level. Genesis 15, verse 1. After this, the word of Yah came to Abram in a vision, saying, do not be afraid, I am your shield, your exceeding reward. Verse 2 says, but Abram said, Yahweh Elohim, what will you give me, seeing I go childless, and the heir of my house is Eleazar of Damascus? Who's Eleazar? his servant, right? Eleazar of Damascus. Where is Abraham of at this time? He cut off all his family ties. He's not in his father's house. He's away from his country. He's got no other family. All of that, he's aligned himself with Yah. So where is Abram of? We heard Eleazar's of Damascus. Where is Abram of? He's already cut himself off from Haran and all of that stuff. He's cut himself off from his family when him and Lot separated. And he cut himself off from his father. Which, by the way, on a side note, he didn't do that all the way. He got up and left when Abba said to get up and leave. But he didn't do everything at once. That's kind of an encouraging note for us. Sometimes we get discouraged. We're not farther along than we think we should be sometime. Because when we ponder how faithful he's been to us, we wonder why we're such knuckleheads sometimes. Okay? But I'm speaking for me, David, not anybody. So, in verse 3 of chapter 15, Abram said, look, you have given me no offspring, and indeed one born in my house is my heir. And behold, the word of Yah came to him, saying, this one shall not be your heir, but one who will come from your body, your own body, shall be your heir. Important. Hugely important. And that's going to be picked up more in next week's, okay? But he's telling him, your heir is coming from your body. And he brought him outside and he said, look toward the heaven and count the stars if you are able to number them. And he said to them, so shall your descendants be. And he, Abram, believed Yah, and it was accounted to him for righteousness. Now, it doesn't just mean he believed. He was following through on his belief. Abram was being tested. Will he believe in what Yah says, even if it takes a long time for it to come to fruition? Abram is thinking his servant will be his heir, but Yah tells Abram that his heir is going to come from his own body. Moving on to verse 7. And then he said, this is Yah continues, I am Yahweh who brought you out of the land of Ur of Chaldeans to give you this land to inherit it. And he said, and Abram said, Yahweh Elohim, how shall I know that I will inherit it? How am I going to know? How am I going to know for sure? So Yah said to him, bring me a 3-year-old heifer, a 3-year-old female goat, a 3-year-old ram, a turtle dove, and a young pigeon. Anybody hearing this story for the first time? No, I didn't think so. Then he brought him all of these, and he cut them in two down the middle, and placed each piece opposite of the other. But he did not cut the birds in two. And when the vultures came down on the carcasses, Abram drove them away. Now when the sun was setting, when the sun was going down, deep sleep fell upon Abram, and behold, horror and great darkness fell upon him. What's happening when the sun goes down? We're starting a new day, right? Okay. And Abram is in a deep sleep. Okay? And great darkness fell upon him. Verse 13, Yah said to Abram, now know certainly that your descendants will be strangers in a land that is not theirs, and will serve them. And will serve them, and they will afflict them for 400 years. And also the nation whom they serve, I will judge. Afterwards, they shall come out with great possessions. And I think I deleted part of what I wanted to put in there. All right. So, in verse 15, it says, now, as for you, you shall go to your fathers in peace. You shall be buried at a good old age. Now, we read that, and what do we assume? He's going to go the way of man, right? He's going to go to his fathers, right? But he cut himself off from his father. Welcome to my mind. I ask these kind of questions. Wait a minute. Hold on. Time out. So it says, you shall go to your fathers. So I looked up that word go. That word go is the Hebrew word, it's the Hebrew 935. The word is bo. Does anybody know what bo means? Come. It can mean go, but it can also mean come. Okay? In fact, the way that it's broken out in the King James Version of the Bible, it's used as come 1,435 times. It's used as go 123. Not that that's super significant. It's just that there's a vast majority of time it's used as come. Or it's used as come. So it's a primitive root to go or to come. All right? So I want you to think about that, and I want you to think about it from the Sod point of view. What is the hidden message that's in there? So then I went and looked at fathers. And that is Hebrew 1. And Strong's definition says, father, in a literal and immediate or a figurative or remote application, chief, father, patrimony, principal. It's used, it's singular. That's what I'm trying to tell you. It's singular in the Hebrew Strong's definition. Here's what I'm trying to get a point. Here's the point that I'm trying to get across. Abram had cut himself off from his father. He cut himself off from the land. He cut himself off from his family. He aligned himself only with God. Okay? And that verse said, for now, as for you, you shall go to your fathers in peace, and you shall be buried at a good old age. With the definitions that I just told you, there could be an alternate reading. It could be read like this. Now, as for you, you shall come to your father in peace. So run that through. I don't expect you to just buy into it. I expect to, I'm actually hoping as I'm teaching that other scriptures are popping into your mind and you've got other questions of your own, because that's how we make disciples. So, continuing in verse 16. Chapter 15, verse 16. But in the fourth generation, they shall return here, for the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet complete. Now, I had a little fun with this. I looked at that fourth generation, and I said, let me draw that out in words. So we're starting out with Abram. So it says in the fourth generation, they shall return here. Okay? So Abram's kids, that would be Isaac and Ishmael. Here is a trick question. Is Isaac Abram's son?
No.
Why not?
It's Abraham's son.
It's Abraham's son. That detail is absolutely critical to understanding the full picture of what Yah's trying to tell us from Genesis all the way to Maps. Okay? That is critically important. The flip side of that is Ishmael, Abraham's son. Okay. That answer is a yes and a no. And here's why. Because once his name is changed to Abram, every time you look back through Abram. And Ishmael is there. But in context, Ishmael is not Abraham's son. Ishmael is Abram's son. Isaac is not Abram's son. Isaac is Abraham's son. We'll get more into that next week. So, Abram's kids. I'm going to just follow Isaac, and you'll see why in just a few minutes. Abram's kids, Isaac. Then Abram's kids, Jacob and Israel. Jacob, whose name gets changed to Israel. I'm going to leave off Esau for right now, and you'll understand why in a minute. Abram's kids. That would be the 12 tribes, right? Abram's kids. That is the children of the 12. Or the great-grandsons, if you will. Now, those are going to be Moses and Aaron from the tribe of Levi, Ephraim and Manasseh. Now, this is a tricky one too. Ephraim and Manasseh biologically are the kids of the kids, but what changed that? Something happened that changed that before Jacob died, right? Before Israel died. The cross-handed blessings. Ephraim's sons, or Joseph's sons, became as Jacob's sons. So we have to read carefully and keep everything in context and keep filtering everything through the context through which it was written. All right. Now, so that's the fourth generation. It says, but in the fourth generation they shall return here. Interestingly enough, in Exodus 12, verse 40, it says, now the sojourn of the children of Israel who lived in Egypt was 430 years. I'm not going to address the argument between the 400 and the 430. That's not for this. That's a whole different conversation. For this point, 400 years, they journeyed in the land of Egypt. Exodus 12, verse 41. And it came to pass at the end of the 430 years, on the very same day, it came to pass that the armies of Yah went out of Egypt. We call that the Exodus, right? Verse 17. And it came to pass when the sun went down and it was dark, that we're going back to Genesis 15, 17. Going back to Genesis 15, 17. And it came to pass when the sun went down and it was dark, that behold, there appeared a smoking oven and a burning torch that passed between those places. In verse 18, and on that same day, Yah made a covenant with Abram, saying, to your descendants I have given. It's past tense this time. Up until this time, it was give. I'm going to give. What's he doing right here? He's making that covenant with Abraham. And he says, at this point, I've given this land to your descendants. From the river of Egypt to the great river, the river Euphrates. He's saying, I've given that land in a past tense. He's made that covenant. That's the way he's going to put it. Now we all know with the covenant, what was Abram's responsibility in this covenant? We know when the animals are cut in half, the two people of the covenant typically walk through the cut animals, right? Well, where was Abram? Asleep, in a deep sleep. Abba laid this upon himself to make sure this covenant. Now, this is important as we go through the rest of Scripture too. It's his responsibility. He put that responsibility on him to make those descendants, to protect those descendants, to all those things he'd already said. With this covenant, he laid that upon him. He laid it upon himself. So, because of the way that this breaks up and where I want to go from here, I'm going to stop in Exodus 15 today. We'll pick up next week and carry on, and I'm going to point out some very significant differences between Ishmael and Isaac. And then between Jacob and Esau, you already know. And I'm going to show you 3 witnesses that tells us that it is Yah that determines who's in his family and who's not in his family. And he does it with 2 of those witnesses before they're even born. So there's a lot to think about. And it changes, there's so many people that have many misconceptions because, well, there's 1,000 reasons, but the most prevalent reason is understanding the Scripture in context. Now, the reason they may not understand the Scripture in context, maybe they've never been taught it that way. Maybe they've never stopped and read it close. I ask thousands of questions as I'm going through the Scripture. I'm thinking of questions while I'm laying down to take a nap, or even when I'm in bed. I am thinking about, how does this line up? Because the context is so important. It's extremely important, especially when you're looking at like the Ishmael and the Isaac instant. Abram and Abraham are 2 different people. If you want to look at it in the New Testament context, it's a new creation. Okay? We've said before, the Tanakh, the Old Testament, is the New Testament concealed. And the New Testament is the Old Testament revealed. We find out in the New Testament who all the players were back here. We find out who the Messiah is. That's the key point. We find out who the Messiah is. The Messiah ends up being the Word. As long as I'm there. As long as I'm there. How many's familiar with John chapter 1? Yeah. Okay. In the beginning was the Word was with God, the Word was God, right? You go down further and it says he was the light. Gee, that sounds familiar too. You go down a little further and it says he came to his own, but his own did not accept him. When he came to his own and his own did not accept him, according to Scripture, was he in flesh dwelling among us yet? He wasn't, because he didn't become flesh and dwell among us until verse 14, right? So he came to his own, and his own did not accept him. And if it wasn't Yeshua in the flesh, what was it? John told us in verse 1, didn't he? The Word. David unlocked so many things for me. It seems like it's 100 years ago that you brought that up, but we have to remember that before Yeshua was Yeshua, Yeshua was the Word. We're taking it out of context if we're looking through the Brit, through Yeshua, Back to the Word. The Word became flesh and dwelt among us. Now that dwelt among us, I think that is important too, because there are passages that sure make it sound like there was somebody in the flesh talking to him, like in fact, yeah. Can anybody see it? That's it. Samson's parents talked to somebody. They did the whole thing. Could that have been Yeshua? Could that have been the Word in the flesh? It could have been. Was it the Word in the flesh dwelling among us? Absolutely not. So there's a little bit, you look at these subtle things. We have to consider the context of the way things were written. And so with that in mind, I hope I've stirred up at least some curiosity. Even if some of you are saying, the last piece of fruit that dude ate was fermented. Because he sure don't know what he's talking about right now. Investigate it. Investigate it. Because, you know, and you may come back and show me something that I didn't see. I'm not allergic to that. I'm all about us being disciples together and growing together. All of us growing together. So next week, we're going to pick up with those things we talked about this week, and we're going to add some more detail as we go through them, okay? And separate some things out, and you're going to see a pattern. We've got patterns all over the place. There are patterns all over the place. This passage of Scripture from Genesis 12 to Genesis 24, that is a big majority of the whole ball of wax right there. That's a big majority of the whole ball of wax. After Genesis 24, we begin to see the history of the family. Of what family? Of Yah's family. That's what the rest of the book is about. And that's something else that we have trouble sharing with people because they don't understand that concept. They think the book is for everybody. It is for His people. And as I was going through all this, and I'll close with this, as I was going through all this, there was a prime question that came up in my mind. Something that we should be asking ourselves every time we study. And I don't mean you have to concentrate on it. You don't need to be like that dude sitting thinking, why did Yah create the heavens and the earths? And does this fit in with the reason He created it? You keep those two questions in mind as you're studying, and it will help you keep things in context. Okay? Now, does anybody have any questions, comments, rebuttals? I love this crowd.
May please repeat the last part? Sorry.
The last part?
Yes.
Does anybody have any questions?
No. So 2 questions to ask yourself.
Okay, the 2 questions to ask yourself are, why did Yah create the heavens and earth to begin with? And as long as are you typing this down as a note?
Yes.
Okay. Then add to that, why did He do it in the order that He did? Because with the order He did, He made sure everything was in place to make sure that man could be sustained through everything He created before He created man. And the second part of that, well, I guess it's the third now. Yeah, is with whatever I'm studying now, how does it fit in with why Yah created the heaven and the earth? Okay? And that just came to me this week to be thinking that question. And I do it unconsciously a lot. He created, well, I'll let you wrestle with that.
What I am studying
Whatever you're studying, does it align with, do you understand it in the context of why he created the heaven and the earth? So and I'll give you a hint. It's because he wanted to hang out with somebody. Okay? All right, so I'm going to close it out with that. Now's the time to thank you very much.